"I freeze, help me," whispered the Apache woman almost without voice. But the cowboy, the sun, was beginning its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the vast desert with shades of gold, orange, and crimson. The wind swept across the barren land, carrying with it the dry scent of sand and the faint, distant smell of sagebrush. Every grain seemed to glisten under the dying light, making the endless desert almost seem alive. Amid this harsh and lonely landscape, an Apache woman moved cautiously. Her name was Lita, though she rarely spoke it aloud. The long journey had left her tired and weary, every muscle in her body aching from walking for hours under the scorching sun. She carried little more than a small bundle of supplies and the heavy weight of fear pressing on her chest. Lita had been traveling alone since leaving her village. Earlier that day, a group of men had attacked her home while she was out hunting. The memory of smoke rising from the horizon and the terrified cries of her people haunted her. She had run as fast as she could, not daring to look back, but fear had not left her even in the open desert. Every rock, every shadow seemed to hold a threat. The world around her, vast and silent, offered little comfort. She clutched her bundle tighter, feeling the rough fabric scrape against her skin, and forced herself to keep moving. She knew stopping for too long could be dangerous, but exhaustion tugged at her with relentless insistence. As she climbed a small rise, Lita noticed the first signs of evening shadows stretching across the land. The light was fading fast, and with it, the desert seemed to change. Shapes emerged from the rocks and dunes, and the wind carried whispers that might have been real or imagined. Her heart began to beat faster. She paused behind a large boulder, crouching low to the ground. The stillness was deafening, and even the sound of her own breathing seemed too loud. She could feel her pulse in her temples, and for a moment she allowed herself to close her eyes and pray silently for safety. It was then that she heard it, a sound different from the wind or the shifting sand. Footsteps, not the light, cautious steps of an animal, but deliberate human steps, heavy and confident. Her body froze instinctively. Lita's mind raced. Should she hide? Should she try to run again? Every instinct screamed danger, but moving might reveal her position. She pressed herself against the boulder, peering through the narrowing gap between rocks. Dust swirled in the faint light, and then she saw him. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in the worn leather of a cowboy. His boots made soft impressions in the sand, and he carried himself with the ease of someone accustomed to the wild. Lita's voice caught in her throat. She wanted to cry out for help, but fear choked her words. Finally, in a whisper so quiet it seemed to merge with the wind itself, she managed, "I freeze, help me." The words barely left her lips, but they were enough to let the man know she was there. The cowboy paused, tilting his head as if listening to the soft whisper carried by the breeze. He did not draw a weapon. Instead, he stepped carefully, slowly, trying not to startle her. His eyes, sharp and attentive, scanned the terrain as though he could read the desert itself. Lita felt a strange mix of fear and hope. Who was this man? Was he friend or foe? Her instincts told her to run, but her legs refused to obey. There was something in the way he moved, calm, controlled, deliberate, that hinted he might not be like the others who had brought terror to her life. She had no choice but to wait, praying silently that he would not turn out to be a new threat. Her breath came in short, shallow bursts as she tried to steady her trembling hands. The desert, once merely a backdrop to her flight, now seemed almost alive with tension. Every rock and shadow held the possibility of danger, and yet, in that moment, she clung to the faint hope that someone could help her. The cowboy approached a little closer, keeping his distance to avoid alarming her. His eyes were a clear, steady blue, and they seemed to hold both caution and curiosity. He raised his hand slightly, palms outward, a universal gesture of peace. Lita noticed the gentle way he moved, the way he seemed to respect the space between them. Slowly she felt a flicker of trust. It was fragile, delicate, and could break with a single wrong step, but it was enough to keep her from running blindly into the desert. She watched him carefully, noting the way his boots sank into the sand, the way his coat rustled in the wind, the way he seemed to survey the land as if he belonged to it. "Are you alone?" the cowboy asked finally, his voice low but steady. It carried over the whispering wind without startling her. Lita nodded, unable to speak immediately. She felt the weight of her fear pressing down, but there was something in his tone that seemed to invite honesty. "I ran from men," she said slowly, each word deliberate. "They attacked my village." Her voice trembled and she clenched her bundle tightly. The memory of flames and screams made her stomach churn, but she forced herself to continue. "I don't know where to go." The cowboy's expression softened slightly. He did not move closer but stayed at a careful distance, showing he would not force her to trust him too quickly. "I can help," he said simply. There was no boast or bravado in his words, only a quiet certainty. Lita's eyes widened. Could she really believe this stranger? In a world that had offered her nothing but danger, the idea of help seemed almost impossible. Yet, something in the way he looked at her, the way he acknowledged her fear without judgment, made her consider it. For a long moment they stood in silence. The desert around them seemed to hold its breath, as if it too understood the gravity of the moment. Lita's mind raced with questions. Who was he? Why would he help her? What dangers still lurked in the shadows? But even as doubt gnawed at her, her body responded to the presence of someone willing to protect her. It was a strange, unfamiliar feeling, but it brought a small measure of relief. She had survived the desert alone, but the presence of another human being offered a chance she had not dared to hope for. Finally, with a cautious step, the cowboy moved a little closer, nodding as if to say he would wait for her to decide. Lita took a shaky breath and nodded back. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, but for the first time in hours, she felt that she was not completely alone. The sun continued its descent, casting long shadows that merged with the approaching twilight. Birds cried in the distance, and the wind whispered through the rocks, carrying away some of the tension. Yet the danger was far from gone. Lita knew that the desert could be as cruel as any human foe, and she still had a long journey ahead. But for now, she allowed herself a small measure of hope, clinging to the presence of the cowboy and the promise of help. Step by careful step, they began to move together, navigating the uneven terrain of the desert. The cowboy kept his movements deliberate and visible, ensuring that Lita could follow without fear. She mirrored his pace, her eyes constantly scanning the horizon for signs of danger. Every now and then, the wind carried the faint sound of distant footsteps, reminding them both that the world was not entirely safe. Yet, despite the uncertainty, a connection began to form, a fragile bond born of shared necessity and mutual respect. As night approached, the sky turned deep indigo, and stars began to twinkle faintly above the desert. The shadows lengthened and the temperature dropped sharply. Lita shivered, hugging herself against the chill. The cowboy noticed and offered a small blanket he carried in his pack. She hesitated for a moment, then accepted it, feeling the warmth spread through her body. It was a simple gesture, but in that moment it symbolized something far greater: trust, kindness, and the recognition that help could take many forms. The desert, once a place of fear and isolation, now seemed to hold the possibility of safety, even if only for a little while. The night deepened, and they moved cautiously toward a small rock formation that could offer shelter. The cowboy scouted ahead briefly, then returned to guide Lita safely. She followed, keeping close enough to feel protected but far enough to maintain her own space. Their silence was comfortable, each respecting the other's presence without unnecessary words. The desert was still vast and unforgiving, but in this moment they faced it together. The memory of her village, of the flames and the screams, lingered in Lita's mind, but it was tempered by the knowledge that she was not entirely alone. The first stars of evening twinkled above the desert as the Apache woman, Lita, and the cowboy slowly made their way through the uneven terrain. The air had cooled sharply, but it carried no comfort for Lita yet. She was still alert, every sound amplified, every shadow suspicious. Even the gentle whisper of the wind through the rocks seemed to her like the rustle of hidden dangers. The cowboy noticed her tension but said nothing, instead walking a step ahead and carefully scanning the surroundings. He wanted her to feel safe, not rushed, yet he understood the urgency of their journey. Every step counted because dangers were never far behind. As they moved, Lita's mind replayed the horrific scenes that had driven her into the desert. Her village, once a place of laughter, warmth, and family, had been reduced to chaos and smoke. She remembered the crackle of fire, the cries of her people, and the panic that surged in her chest. She had never been this far from home, and the vastness of the desert made her feel even smaller, more vulnerable. Yet seeing the cowboy walking beside her, firm, calm, and focused, made her realize that she did not have to face everything alone. His presence offered a small glimmer of hope, fragile as it was. After a while, the cowboy broke the silence. "You must be hungry," he said softly. "Here." He handed her a small bundle of dried meat and bread. Lita hesitated, unsure if she should trust this stranger. She had survived on minimal supplies and instinct alone, and accepting help still felt dangerous. But her stomach was empty, and her body needed strength. Carefully, she took the food and ate, keeping her eyes on the desert as she chewed. The cowboy did the same, taking only small bites and watching her as if to ensure she was safe. Eating together silently, they shared the most basic form of connection, one that needed no words: survival. The path ahead was rocky, with small cliffs and scattered boulders that created both obstacles and cover. The cowboy led her through narrow passages, pointing out areas where the ground might give way or where snakes or other creatures could be hiding. Lita was grateful for his guidance, and slowly, a sense of trust began to grow. She realized that his careful movements were not just for her safety, they were also a reflection of experience and knowledge of the land. He knew how to survive here, and she could follow him, learning in silence as they moved. As night deepened, the desert seemed to change. The stars shone brighter, the air grew colder, and the sounds of nocturnal creatures became more pronounced. Lita felt a shiver run down her spine. Every crack of a twig or rustle of sand made her heart leap. Yet the cowboy remained composed. He seemed to understand the rhythm of the desert, its hidden signals and dangers. He would occasionally glance back at her, his blue eyes meeting hers, offering silent reassurance that she was not alone. Each glance became a quiet comfort, though Lita still struggled to speak more than a few words at a time. Fear made her cautious, but she was learning slowly that not all humans were threats. Finally, they reached a small cave, partially hidden behind a cluster of jagged rocks. It was modest but offered enough shelter from the wind and the darkness. The cowboy gestured for her to stay inside, then stepped out briefly, surveying the surrounding desert to make sure they were not being followed. Lita's hands trembled slightly as she settled into the cave. The sand inside was cooler than the ground outside, and the faint smell of rock and earth filled the space. For the first time since leaving her village, she felt a small measure of safety, though she knew it was temporary. Danger still lurked beyond the rocks, waiting for any mistake. The cowboy returned after a few minutes, his expression calm but alert. He had found nothing, yet he made it clear that they could not stay long. "We need to keep moving," he said. Lita nodded, though a part of her wished she could stay in the relative security of the cave for hours. The desert offered no comfort for the weak or hesitant, and both of them knew that. They rested only briefly, sharing water from a small flask, and then continued their journey. Step by cautious step, they made their way through the starlit desert, the moon rising high and casting long shadows that danced across the sand and rocks. As they walked, the cowboy began to speak softly about the land. "The desert looks empty," he said, "but it's full of life. You just have to know where to look." Lita listened, intrigued despite herself. He pointed out small tracks in the sand, the dried remains of plants, and the subtle movements of small creatures that went unnoticed by most. His knowledge was impressive, and she began to see the desert differently, not just as a place of danger, but as a living, breathing world with rules and secrets. It was a lesson in survival, one she absorbed eagerly while still wary of the shadows. Hours passed. They shared few words, but the silence was not uncomfortable. It was filled with mutual understanding and unspoken acknowledgement of their shared journey. Lita began to realize that fear, though powerful, could be tempered with patience and guidance. The cowboy had no reason to help her, and yet he did. There was bravery in that, a kind of courage she had not often witnessed. Slowly, her admiration for him grew, though she kept her feelings guarded. Trust was delicate in a world so full of danger, and she knew better than to rush it. Eventually, the faint outline of a dry riverbed appeared in the moonlight. It offered a natural path that would allow them to move faster and with more cover. The cowboy led her down the gentle slope, pointing out where the sand was soft and where rocks could be slippery. "Stay close," he said, "and don't make sudden movements." Lita nodded, feeling the truth of his words. She had learned the desert's lessons before, but they had always been alone. With him guiding her, she could move with a measure of confidence she had not felt in hours. Step by careful step, they made their way through the dry riverbed, shadows stretching long and eerie in the silver moonlight. As they moved, Lita's thoughts drifted to her village and the people she had lost. Tears threatened to spill, but she held them back, focusing instead on the present. Survival required attention, not sorrow. Yet she allowed herself small moments of reflection, noticing the kindness in the cowboy's gestures, the way he offered water, how he moved with awareness of danger, and the calm way he spoke. She began to understand that strength was not just about fighting, it was also about patience, knowledge, and empathy. In a strange way, he was teaching her to see hope again, even in the face of fear. Hours later, they reached another rocky outcrop, this one larger and offering better shelter. Here, the cowboy suggested they rest for a longer period. Lita hesitated, but seeing the care in his eyes, she agreed. They settled among the rocks, the desert stretching endlessly around them. The stars reflected off the sand, and the air was still except for the soft whistle of wind. For the first time since leaving her village, Lita allowed herself to breathe deeply, to feel that she could survive this night with the cowboy by her side. She did not speak much, but the presence of another human being gave her courage she had almost forgotten existed. Before sleep claimed them, the cowboy shared a small piece of his own story. He spoke quietly of life on the frontier, of times when he had faced danger alone, and of moments when someone had helped him unexpectedly. Lita listened, finding comfort in the shared understanding of fear and courage. In a world that often demanded survival at the cost of trust, they were learning to rely on each other. She realized that help was not just about physical safety. It was about guidance, patience, and mutual respect. And in the desert that night, under a sky full of stars, those lessons felt as vital as water or food. As the night deepened, they rested, the desert around them silent except for the occasional distant howl of an animal. Lita, wrapped in the blanket the cowboy had offered, felt exhaustion creep into her limbs. But she also felt something else, a growing sense of trust, fragile yet undeniable. She had faced fear alone and she had survived, but now she understood the power of shared courage. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, perhaps new dangers, but for tonight she could rest. For tonight there was hope. The next morning the sun rose slowly over the desert, casting a soft golden glow across the rocks and sand. The air was still cool, but the warmth of the approaching day promised relief from the night's chill. Lita stirred, rubbing her eyes and stretching tired muscles. Sleep had been restless, filled with dreams of fire, screams, and the faces of those she had lost. The cowboy, already awake, moved quietly outside the shelter of the rocks, scanning the horizon. His posture was calm but alert, a silent reminder that the desert never truly slept. Danger could come from anywhere, and they had to be ready. Lita hesitated before stepping out. Her body ached from the long journey, and fear still clung to her like a shadow. But seeing the cowboy's steady gaze gave her courage. Slowly, she followed him out of the shelter, keeping a careful distance. Every footstep on the sandy ground echoed softly, and the wind carried the faint sounds of desert life, birds calling in the distance, the rustle of small animals in the brush, and the whisper of sand shifting over rocks. The desert was alive in ways that could be both beautiful and threatening. Lita had learned that every movement mattered, every sound could signal danger, and every decision could mean survival or disaster. As they moved, the cowboy spoke in a low, steady voice. "We can't stay in one place too long," he said. "They'll find us if we linger." His words were not meant to frighten her, they were a simple truth. Lita nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. She knew he was right. The men who had attacked her village would not give up easily. The thought of them closing in made her stomach churn, but the presence of the cowboy made her feel less alone, less helpless. Together, they were stronger, even if the path ahead was uncertain. The desert stretched endlessly, but the cowboy guided her through safer routes, small valleys, shaded ridges, and hidden trails he had learned over years of traveling this harsh land. Lita followed carefully, her eyes scanning for danger, her body tense but responsive. She noticed how the cowboy moved with a quiet confidence, each step deliberate, each glance scanning for threats. There was no panic in his movements, only awareness, and somehow that steadiness began to calm her own fear. Hours passed, and the sun climbed higher in the sky. The heat became oppressive, the sand burning beneath their boots and their water supply dwindled. Lita's lips were dry, and her throat ached from the long, cautious journey. The cowboy noticed her fatigue and offered small sips from his flask. "Take it slow," he said. "Conserve your strength." Lita nodded, feeling a mix of gratitude and humility. She had always relied on her own skills to survive, but now she realized that survival could also mean trusting someone else, sharing the burden, and learning from those with experience. Suddenly, a faint noise carried on the wind, a sound too deliberate to be part of the desert's normal rhythm. Lita froze instantly, her heart leaping into her throat. The cowboy stopped too, raising a hand to signal silence. "They're close," he whispered, his voice calm but urgent. Lita's pulse raced. She had hoped distance and caution would keep them safe, but now the threat had come closer than either of them wanted. The desert that had seemed both vast and isolating suddenly felt small, confined, and dangerous. Shadows moved in her peripheral vision, and every instinct screamed at her to run, but the cowboy's steady presence reminded her to stay focused. He led her into a narrow canyon, where the walls rose high on either side. The confined space offered some cover, but it also meant fewer escape routes. They crouched low, moving carefully over loose stones, listening for the sound of approaching footsteps. Lita's breath came in short, shallow bursts. Her muscles tensed, ready to react at a moment's notice. She had been afraid before, but this fear was different, sharper, immediate, and consuming. She trusted the cowboy, but the danger was real, and it pressed down on her like the weight of the sun above. The minutes felt like hours as they moved through the canyon. Then a faint sound reached them again, louder this time, a snap of a twig, the soft crunch of sand under boots. The bandits had found the trail. Lita's fear surged, but the cowboy remained calm, scanning the rocks and adjusting their position. "Stay behind me," he whispered. "Keep low and move only when I do." Lita obeyed, each step careful, her eyes fixed on him as if he were the only anchor in a world that threatened to collapse. Suddenly, A figure appeared at the top of a ridge. Lita could barely make out the outline against the sunlit sand, but she recognized the danger immediately. Another bandit was approaching, moving with confidence, clearly searching for them. The cowboy crouched, pressing Lita gently against the canyon wall. "Don't move," he said. "Watch and learn." Lita's heart pounded, but she obeyed. From this close, she could see the determination in the man's movements, the arrogance in his step, and the careless confidence of someone who believed he controlled the desert. The cowboy's calm contrasted sharply with the threat, and Lita felt a strange admiration for his courage. Hours passed as they continued their careful journey through the canyon. The bandits were close, but the cowboy's knowledge of the land allowed them to remain hidden. He pointed out safe spots behind rocks, dry streambeds, and shadows that offered protection from both the sun and the eyes of their pursuers. Lita absorbed every detail, learning quickly. She began to understand the importance of patience, observation, and timing. Survival was not just about strength. It was about awareness, cleverness, and careful decision-making. The cowboy was teaching her all of this silently, through actions more than words. By mid-afternoon, the heat of the sun made every movement exhausting. Lita's energy was waning, but she pushed herself forward. The cowboy noticed her fatigue and adjusted their pace, offering quiet encouragement. "We're almost to a better path," he said. "Stay close." Lita nodded, feeling both reassurance and a renewed sense of determination. She had come far since leaving her village, and though the journey was terrifying, she was learning that fear could be managed, that danger could be navigated, and that trust, though fragile, could be life-saving. Then, as they reached the edge of the canyon, a sudden shout rang out from behind them. The bandits had discovered part of their trail. Panic surged through Lita, but the cowboy remained calm, quickly assessing their options. "Move fast but stay low," he commanded. They sprinted down a narrow, winding path, leaping over rocks and slipping through shadows. The bandits were close, shouting and cursing, but the cowboy's knowledge of the terrain gave them an advantage. Lita felt her fear transform into focus. She could run, hide, and survive if she followed his lead precisely. The chase was relentless. The sun climbed high, the wind blew fiercely, and the sand burned their feet. Yet with every step, Lita began to feel a strange exhilaration. Fear had once been paralyzing, but now it drove her forward with purpose. The cowboy's presence gave her strength, and she discovered reserves of courage she hadn't known existed. Each narrow escape, each careful maneuver, reinforced the bond between them. Trust was no longer just an idea. It was a practical tool for survival, tested by every heartbeat and every breath. By late afternoon, they found a dry, rocky ravine that offered better cover. They pressed themselves against the stones, panting, exhausted but still alive. The bandits were close enough to hear, but the cowboy had chosen this spot carefully, with multiple escape routes. Lita crouched beside him, her hands trembling but her resolve steadying. "We can rest for a moment," he said quietly. "We have to be ready to move again, but just a short rest." Lita nodded, grateful for the brief reprieve, even as she remained aware that the danger was far from over. As they caught their breath, the cowboy spoke softly. "You're doing well," he said. "Most people would have frozen, panicked, or run blindly. You're learning fast." Lita looked at him, surprised by the praise. She had expected only criticism or orders, but instead he acknowledged her courage. It was a small gesture, but it lifted her spirits. She realized that survival was not only about physical strength. It was also about mental endurance, resilience, and learning to trust someone who had experience in the world she was only beginning to understand. Night began to fall, and the desert cooled rapidly. The stars appeared again, twinkling above the vast landscape. Lita and the cowboy moved carefully, using the fading light to guide them while staying hidden from the bandits. Each step was measured, each movement deliberate. They were a team now, relying on each other for safety, guidance, and courage. The chase had tested them, but it had also strengthened their connection, revealing a bond built not only on necessity but also on respect and mutual reliance. By the time they found a sheltered spot for the night, Lita's exhaustion was profound, yet her spirit felt renewed. She had faced fear, survived pursuit, and learned to trust another human being in a world that had shown her only danger. As they rested, wrapped in blankets and leaning against the rocks, she realized that survival was a combination of courage, knowledge, patience, and trust. The cowboy had guided her through the desert, protected her from immediate threats, and taught her lessons she would carry for the rest of her life. The desert night was alive with shadows, whispering wind, and the distant cry of an owl. Lita and the cowboy had been moving for hours, keeping low and silent, each step careful to avoid the prying eyes of the men chasing them. Every rustle of sand, every crack of a twig made Lita's heart race, but she had learned to control her fear, following the cowboy's steady lead. He had become her anchor, guiding her through the treacherous landscape and giving her the courage to face what lay ahead. As they reached the edge of a narrow canyon, the faint glow of a campfire caught their attention. Lita froze, pressing herself against the rocky wall. Her pulse hammered in her chest. The bandits had stopped here, close enough for their voices to carry in the still night air. She could hear the laughter of men, rough and cruel, and the clink of metal as they handled weapons. The reality of their presence hit her with a sharp weight. This was not a distant threat anymore. They were here, and any wrong move could mean disaster. The cowboy, sensing her fear, whispered softly, "Stay calm. We can get through this. Follow my lead." His voice was quiet but firm, and Lita felt a flicker of reassurance. She had learned to trust him, and in moments like this, trust could mean the difference between life and death. She nodded, pressing herself lower against the rocks, and took a slow, steadying breath. The desert around them seemed to hold its breath as well, the wind falling silent as if aware of the tension. The bandits were unaware of their presence, caught up in their own careless movements. The cowboy studied them carefully, calculating a plan. He knew they could not outrun the men forever, and the canyon offered both danger and opportunity. With careful gestures, he signaled to Lita to move closer behind him. Each step was deliberate, slow, and silent. Lita followed, her eyes fixed on him, every muscle tense and ready. She felt fear, yes, but it was controlled, focused, sharpened by necessity. She had never imagined she could feel this level of awareness and purpose, yet the cowboy's guidance made it possible. Suddenly, one of the bandits stood, adjusting his pack, and Lita's breath caught. The cowboy froze, pressed himself closer against the rock, and whispered, "Now behind me. Do exactly as I do." He took a few steps to the side, moving behind cover, and Lita followed, mirroring every motion. Her heart raced, her palms were sweaty, but she managed to stay silent. The danger was immediate, pressing, and consuming. Every second mattered. One misstep could reveal them. The bandits' laughter faded as one of them noticed a shift in the shadows, but it was too late. The cowboy had positioned himself strategically, using the rocks as cover while keeping Lita protected. He whispered instructions quickly, precise, and calm. "Wait for my signal. Don't move until I say so." Lita nodded, gripping the small bundle she carried, ready for whatever came next. The desert felt like it had shrunk around them, turning into a labyrinth of stones and shadows, each corner hiding potential threats. The confrontation began when one of the bandits stumbled closer to their hiding place, unaware that the cowboy had already anticipated his path. With a sudden, swift movement, the cowboy stepped into view, catching the man off guard. The bandit's shout echoed through the canyon, but the cowboy's quick thinking and confident movements created a barrier between him and Lita. She watched in awe, her fear mingling with a growing admiration for his courage. He was fearless, not reckless, and his actions were precise and deliberate. Another bandit joined the first, realizing too late that they were being confronted. The cowboy remained calm, positioning himself to block any approach to Lita. "Stay behind me," he shouted, his voice strong and commanding. Lita obeyed, crouching low, her eyes wide but steady. She could see the determination in the cowboy's face, the focus in his movements, and she felt a strange sense of security despite the danger surrounding them. He was not just protecting her with his body but with his mind, calculating every move, anticipating every threat. The bandits lunged, but the cowboy was ready. He moved swiftly, using the terrain to his advantage, forcing them to stumble over rocks and sand. Lita watched, heart pounding, as he deflected attacks and created openings, guiding the bandits away from her. Each action was deliberate, a dance of survival in which skill and courage met necessity. She felt her own fear transform into resolve. She would not freeze again. She had learned to observe, to anticipate, to follow his lead, and now she understood that bravery was not the absence of fear but the choice to act despite it. The fight continued, tense and exhausting. The bandits were persistent, their shouts echoing off the canyon walls, but the cowboy remained steady. He used every skill he had learned in the desert, turning the environment itself into an ally. Rocks, shadows, and narrow passages worked to their advantage, and Lita followed every movement, ready to respond. At one point, she saw him step forward to distract a bandit, giving her the opportunity to move safely to a higher rock behind him. She felt a surge of confidence, realizing she could contribute, that she could survive this ordeal not only by following but by understanding the flow of the moment. Hours seemed to pass as the confrontation unfolded. The cowboy's strategy and Lita's cautious movements created a rhythm, a harmony of survival that allowed them to fend off the attackers while minimizing risk. The bandits began to falter, frustration creeping into their movements as they realized the desert was not as easy to navigate as they had believed. Lita's admiration for the cowboy deepened. He was more than a protector. He was a teacher, showing her the power of observation, patience, and courage under pressure. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the bandits began to retreat, their numbers dwindling as they realized they could not overcome the skill and awareness of the two in the canyon. The cowboy did not relax immediately. He continued to watch, alert, ensuring no ambushes or traps remained. Only when he was certain that the immediate threat had passed did he allow himself a moment of rest. Lita, still crouched beside him, felt her body trembling with a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and adrenaline. The confrontation was over for now, but its lessons were deeply imprinted on her mind. The cowboy turned to her, his expression calm but kind. "You did well," he said. Lita looked up, surprised. She had expected only commands or criticism, yet he acknowledged her courage. She had followed, learned, and survived. The acknowledgement gave her a small but profound sense of pride. She realized that bravery was not just about fighting. It was about trust, awareness, and the willingness to act when necessary. She had found all of these qualities within herself, guided by someone who had taught her the desert's language. As they settled in a safer spot for the night, the stars glittered above the canyon walls. The air cooled, carrying the faint scent of sage and dry earth. Lita and the cowboy rested quietly, each reflecting on the day's events. The confrontation had been a test of courage, of trust, of skill. Both had faced danger head-on, and both had emerged alive. Lita realized that she had grown stronger, more capable, and more confident in herself. She had learned that fear could be managed, that trust could be life-saving, and that even in the most perilous moments, courage could emerge when guided by knowledge and compassion. The night was quiet except for the occasional whisper of wind and distant animal calls. Lita wrapped herself in the blanket the cowboy had offered, feeling warmth and a sense of safety. She glanced at him, noticing the way his eyes scanned the canyon even in moments of rest. His vigilance was constant, but it was not just for survival, it was for her as well. She felt a deep sense of gratitude and respect. The confrontation had tested them, but it had also solidified a bond forged in fear, courage, and shared survival. As she drifted into a light, uneasy sleep, Lita reflected on the lessons of the day. The desert was harsh and unforgiving, but it had also revealed resilience within her that she had not known existed. The cowboy had shown her that survival was not only about strength or speed, but also about awareness, patience, and the willingness to trust another human being. She understood now that bravery was not the absence of fear, it was the choice to act despite it. And in the canyon under the endless sky, she had learned the meaning of courage, trust, and the power of facing danger together. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert. The cool air carried a promise of a new day, yet the memories of the night's confrontation lingered in Lita's mind. Her body ached from hours of tension, movement, and adrenaline, but the relief of surviving the encounter was stronger than her fatigue. The cowboy stirred beside her, already alert and scanning the desert as the first rays of sunlight touched the rocks and sand. Lita watched him, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. He had kept her safe, guided her through fear, and taught her how to survive when the world seemed determined to crush hope. She stretched her stiff muscles, the blanket slipping from her shoulders as she rose. The desert was quiet except for the distant calls of birds waking to the morning. The air smelled of dry sand and distant vegetation, fresh and clean after the night. Lita took a deep breath, feeling the cool morning air fill her lungs. She realized that she had survived not just the pursuit of the bandits, but also her own fear, uncertainty, and exhaustion. In the silence of the desert, she reflected on how far she had come in a single night, how much she had learned about courage, trust, and resilience. The cowboy motioned for her to follow him as he led the way out of the canyon. His movements were calm and precise, a testament to years of experience in the wilderness. Lita followed closely, every step deliberate, every movement guided by awareness and care. Though the desert stretched endlessly before them, she felt a sense of purpose she had not known in days. The danger was not entirely gone, but the path ahead seemed less intimidating with him by her side. Every glance he gave her reminded her that she was not alone, and that alone made the vast desert feel a little smaller, a little less hostile. As they walked, the cowboy spoke quietly, pointing out landmarks and natural signs that indicated water or shelter. Lita listened intently, absorbing each word. She realized that surviving the desert required more than running or hiding. It required understanding, observation, and patience. Each small lesson he shared gave her a sense of empowerment. She felt herself growing stronger, not just physically but mentally, realizing that knowledge and awareness were as vital as courage. The bond between them had deepened in ways she could not fully express, a trust built not on words, but on shared experience and mutual reliance. Hours passed, and the desert heat rose, but the cowboy guided them carefully, taking paths that offered shade and soft sand underfoot. Lita followed, carrying herself with more confidence than she had at the beginning of their journey. She remembered the fear that had once gripped her at every sound, every shadow, and she marveled at how she had learned to control it, to act with awareness instead of panic. The cowboy's steady presence had transformed her fear into focus, and that realization filled her with quiet pride. She understood now that courage was not the absence of fear, it was the choice to act despite it. Midday approached, and they reached the top of a small hill overlooking a dry riverbed. From here, the desert stretched far and wide, and Lita allowed herself a moment to rest and take in the view. The silence was profound, broken only by the whisper of the wind and the distant calls of wildlife. The cowboy crouched beside her, handing her a small amount of water. "Drink carefully," he advised. Lita nodded, grateful for the gesture. It was more than water. It was a symbol of support, a reminder that she did not have to endure this journey alone. She took small sips, feeling the cool liquid revive her body and spirit. As they continued down the riverbed, Lita noticed small tracks in the sand, signs of animals perhaps, but also reminders that the desert was alive. Every movement, every subtle shift in the sand carried meaning. She realized how much she had learned from the cowboy about observation, patience, and reading the environment. These lessons extended beyond survival. They were lessons in life itself, in understanding the world and one's place within it. She felt gratitude swell within her heart, a warmth that replaced some of the lingering fear from the previous night. By late afternoon, they found a secluded area where the rocks formed a natural shelter from the sun. The cowboy gestured for her to rest, and she gratefully accepted. They sat together in quiet reflection, the desert stretching endlessly around them. Lita looked at him, her mind filled with questions she had not dared to ask before. Why did you help me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. The cowboy looked at her, his expression calm and thoughtful. "Because it was the right thing to do," he replied simply. "You needed help and I could provide it, that's all that matters." His words struck her deeply. In a world that had shown her betrayal, violence, and fear, here was someone who acted out of simple humanity. She realized that help was more than a word, it was an action, a choice made in courage and compassion. The cowboy had chosen to act, to protect, and to guide her, even at risk to himself. Lita felt a new understanding of trust, a profound respect for the power of kindness, and a sense of hope that had long been buried beneath fear. As evening approached, the desert began to glow with the warm colors of sunset. The cowboy and Lita moved carefully, finding a safe place to settle for the night. They shared a modest meal of dried meat and bread, conserving their energy while remaining alert to the surroundings. Lita realized how much she had relied on him, not only for safety but also for guidance, for teaching her how to survive and observe. She felt a quiet pride in herself, in the courage and resilience she had discovered within, even as she acknowledged that she could not have made it this far alone. Night fell, and the stars glittered above the desert in a clear, endless sky. Lita and the cowboy lay on a bed of sand, wrapped in blankets, listening to the quiet rhythm of the desert. For the first time since leaving her village, she felt a sense of peace. The danger had not disappeared, but they had survived, and she had grown stronger. The cowboy glanced at her and nodded, a silent acknowledgement of their shared experience. Words were unnecessary. The bond formed through trust, courage, and mutual reliance was enough. Lita reflected on the journey. She had left her village in fear, alone and uncertain, but she had discovered resilience, awareness, and bravery along the way. She had learned that fear could be managed, that trust could be life-saving, and that kindness and courage often came from the simplest actions. She realized that the cowboy had not only protected her, but had also shown her the strength within herself, a strength she had almost forgotten in the chaos and loss she had experienced. As the night deepened, Lita allowed herself to rest, her mind replaying the lessons learned. She understood now that life, like the desert, was vast, challenging, and unpredictable. Danger could appear without warning, but preparation, awareness, and courage could guide one through even the harshest trials. She thought of the bandits, of the fear that had once gripped her, and of the choice she had made to follow the cowboy's lead. Each step had been a test, each moment a chance to prove herself, and she had passed. In the quiet of the night, the cowboy spoke softly. "You've come far," he said. "Most would have given up, but you kept moving, kept learning, and kept trusting. That's what matters." Lita smiled faintly, feeling warmth and pride. She realized that her journey had not been just about survival. It had been about growth, about discovering courage and resilience she had never known existed. She had faced fear, danger, and uncertainty, and had emerged stronger, wiser, and more confident. By morning, the desert was bathed in the soft glow of dawn once more. Lita and the cowboy prepared to move again, but this time with a sense of calm and determination. The path ahead was uncertain, yet she no longer felt paralyzed by fear. She had learned to trust, to observe, and to act with courage. The cowboy had been her guide, her protector, and her teacher, but she had also discovered strength within herself that would last a lifetime. As they walked together, the desert stretching endlessly before them, Lita felt hope bloom in her heart. She knew the world could be harsh and unforgiving, but she also knew that courage, kindness, and trust could overcome even the darkest challenges. The memory of her village, the fear, and the chase would stay with her, but so too would the lessons, the bond, and the quiet strength she had found. The desert, vast and relentless, had tested her, but she had survived. And in surviving, she had discovered the true measure of courage. The journey was far from over, but Lita now knew that fear would no longer control her. With every step, she carried the lessons of trust, awareness, and bravery. The cowboy walked beside her, a steady presence in the vast desert, and together they moved forward, ready to face whatever the horizon might bring. And as the sun climbed higher, casting its warm light across the land, Lita realized something profound. Help, courage, and hope were not just words. They were choices, actions, and the quiet strength to face life head-on. She had whispered for help once, and in that moment everything had changed.